Thank you for listening to the Allender Center podcast. I'm Dr. Dan Allender.
And I'm Rachael Clinton Chen. We're fiercely committed to providing hope and healing to a fragmented world.
And restoration for the heart.
Thank you for joining us. Let's get this conversation started.
Rachael, you and I have been addressing some of the issues of racial trauma and the reality of the world that we live in, the impact of heartbreak and rage is before us. And we have said it before, we're going to say it again. We will not survive and grow, certainly as an organization, but as a people, if we don't create alliances, if we don't have a capacity to be in difficult conversations and to have them grow us to become who we're meant to be, we will not make it through this period. And we have an incredible gift today to be with two dear friends, Jimmy McGee, who is the president and CEO and head honcho, theologian, philosopher, and prophet of an organization called Impact Movement. And we have been deeply, richly impacted by his life and by the work. And so to have him here, and then not only a friend, but our beloved boss, Dr. Derek McNeil, who is not only a good friend with Jimmy McGee, but in many ways has shepherded the intersection of the Allender Center and the Impact Movement. So what we want to do today is to talk about two core things: how we proceed in the process of dealing with racial trauma and racial injustice and absolute darkness of evil. How do we do this in alliances with people who will help us grow? And how do we do it well when the conversations are so very difficult to enter? So, gentlemen, let me just welcome you and say thank you for joining Rachael and I today.
It's our pleasure.
You know, I think in thinking about this conversation, have just reflected again and again and again that this has been a partnership that's been developing over many years. And even knowing that you and Derek, that Jimmy, you and Derek, you and Jimmy have been friends long before these organizational partnerships. And so in some ways, I'd want to even just go back to the beginning and reflect a little bit about how did we come to this moment in our partnership. And, you know, Jimmy, you always talk about how a good partnership between organizations and even in friendships, there's a win-win. There's a sense of there's something we're able to share with each other and learn from each other. And so I'd want to hear a little bit how you would describe the beginning of this kind of organizational partnership.
But, you know, I think if we talk about the partnership, Derek and Dan, I think someone was playing chess with us. Mm-hmm. We weren't playing chess. Mm-mm. And so at that time, Andy Sicoscio was working for the Seattle School, and she negotiated an idea and say, hey, Jimmy, I want you to come to the story workshop. And I vacillated back and forth. And I said, okay, I need a break. I need a vacation. We had just did our very first cultural competency training in July. And I said, okay, let's do this. And I think she was negotiating with you, Derek, at the same time. Mm-hmm. And Derek, I don't think you were trying to make sense of it all either at that point.
I did not make sense of it. I didn't. I thought it was just oil and water. I had no idea if this was going to work. And I actually thought her both brave and foolish at the same time. And at that time, I was very familiar with Dan Allender because Wendell, who goes back with me years, had went to grad school at the Seattle School, or maybe the first iteration name. And another friend of mine, Mark Miller, had taken one or two classes when Dan was teaching with Larry Crabb. So I had a history, and there was only one book in my library by Dan called Leading with a Limp. It's a red paperback book. And I read maybe a third or fourth of it, but I said, what the heck? I like Seattle. I get to buy some salmon. I'm going to hang out.
It's going to be a vacation.
It's going to be a vacation, with the exception that they put me in Airbnb with a pet rabbit that thought it was a dog. And so I would walk back and forth. I mean, I had to pet the rabbit, and the Airbnb was a condominium about 35 floors high, and I had to make sure it was a bridge there so that the rabbit wouldn't leap off the balcony and end up on the street. So,
I never heard this before.
So we're just sitting there watching the Olympics, and I'm petting the rabbit like it's a dog, and I'm just enjoying my evening. But I can still remember the first day I had made my way from, is it Pikes Pier, down to the school, and I'm sitting in this huge room. Dan didn't meet me. I didn't meet him. I think Derek may have came by, and I'm talking to Andy, and all right, I'm in this story workshop, and the whole room, there was only 3 Black people in the whole room, and I knew all of them. And everybody in the room was just fascinated with everything about the Allender Center. And I said, hey, that's great. I'm here for vacation, and I'm going to go through it.
And you got a pet rabbit.
And I got a pet rabbit. And then things started to kick in 24 hours later. That's when I began to get introduced to trauma, and my psyche began to open up with it. And then it really settled in, Rachel, over a Thai meal with a number of us just having a conversation about race, thinking about the concepts that Dan had introduced. And then my mind began to churn and think about, okay, wait a minute now. We got a whole boatload of Black people being killed in the public square, just like we have today. My staff and students are traumatized. There could be some things that we could translate that can help us. And the next day, Dan spoke on evil. That was the first time I heard a discussion on evil in years. Mm-hmm. And he had already integrated conversations from another guest that was invited. Lisa Sharon Harper was there too. Mm-hmm. And he had already began to think through these processes. Now, I was just only in the early formations of just thinking maybe we could do a partnership. Maybe they can complement our deficits. And as the weekend went by, I can still remember my plane was delayed, and Jeanette White and Dan accosted me before I left the building and said, we want to know more. Can you give us something to do? Because I was coming back in 3 weeks. And that's when I gave them an assignment of a movie, a book, and a picture book to watch. And then I wanted to come back and see how much they would do. And then that would give me an idea of, did we have some potentials to work with? So that's how it really started.
Oh, that was, shall we say, the next several weeks. Ironwood was the movie. Rosewood. Yeah. And as we stepped into a book that is in my home, and it is difficult to take out, a book on lynching. Mm-hmm. And it was one of those moments of just going, wait a minute, 9/11 is where we as an America speak about terrorism. But terrorism began long before. Domestic terrorism began long before. And it was and has been and continues to be one of those moments where you go, how is it that I did not see? How is it that I don't want to see? And now I do see. And it has been that process, really in conversations, certainly with both of you gentlemen, that has been both heart-breaking, heart-revealing, but also hope-creating. And that has to be there. That has to be a sense of entering into the grief, but also into the prospect that there can be movement. And I think you were a little surprised that we had done the work that you asked us to do.
Oh, no, I was more than a little surprised, because it was a test. I wanted to see how much down the rabbit trail did you want to go down, because from what I just sensed from the beginning was there was a lot of depth around the trauma that you had already recognized, both emotionally, physically, and sexually. But this racial trauma is really a combination of all these factors. And I wanted to see, was he able to pick up nuances, leverage the skills that he had now and move forward? And then at that point, my imagination started going. And I talked to Derek once or twice, and I started thinking about the school as well as the Allender Center at that point about how far we can go down the road.
Yeah. And that's the context where you invited us into a hellhole Christian camp in Colorado to do some of the most amazing immersion training. It's very difficult to actually put the words to what the experience is to be able to enter in as a white person into even just 1% of what a person of color suffers on a regular basis, and to do so in an educational process that begins to not just educate, but actually effectively give you something, even 1% of the experience. It was more than eye-opening. And I think that's where Derek joined us in the beginnings of the conversation of, at least with us, what was going on behind the scenes. Maybe the kingdom of God, when it finally reveals itself fully, will know. I didn't know about the rabbit, but let's just say Derek's work of tending to a complex group of people, which he has done well wherever he goes, but he was doing so in this context, weren't you, sir?
Well, I'll back up a little bit, because I do need to emphasize that I thought this would not work. My initial thought was, I don't see this. I've known Jimmy for a while, and I said, we're not ready for Jimmy. We could possibly be ready for Lisa, but not Jimmy. And I thought, he's going to spend a few days with us and decide, well, good to meet you. Thank goodness I had a chance, and we'll see you some other century. But I didn't think it was going to work. And I would say, in that sense of more than just us involved in this is true. And I have to say Holy Spirit. Because at some point it became clear, once Jimmy started seeing possibilities, then I think it excited me. Because then I could see, hey, there is a possibility of this work impacting a community that has been traumatized at some level, some degree, as long as it's been in the United States, but has not had the care and tending to that we would hope a traumatized group of people would have. And we started thinking out of the categories of just individual and even interpersonal, and thinking collective. What might this mean? And so when Jimmy got excited about it, it excited me, because I thought, this is a miracle. This is different. And so when the trip to Colorado, I felt like I had to join that, almost as a way of trying to seal it, to bless it, if you will. And this is 5 years ago? This is how many years ago it was?
It was July 2017. Okay. July 2017.
And I felt like it needed some degree of upper level management of the school to say yes. And my job was to say, yes, keep going. Let's see where this can go. And this is the possibilities of this. And I also, I've always been, I loved Jimmy when he said it was a test. I gave you reading material, I gave you a movie. Most people of color will feel somewhat suspicious of dominant culture because we've lived with it so long and we've been disappointed many times. And so there is a need to do some testing. And so someone says, hey, before we have a conversation, could you go and read that and look at that and get a sense of, because if not, then I've got to do all the education, and the burden of that then falls to me to hold a relationship together. And I think the thing I appreciated was the Allender Center members saying, hey, we want training. And then, they had already started, people from other communities saying, hey, we want training from the Allender Center. And this sort of mutuality was a way to begin, and it offered possibilities. And it's just someone's trying to help somebody else. Dominant culture helping people of color as a relationship starter. It can start something, but that can't be where it ends. And that can't be the conception by which you think of the relationship having enduring momentum. And so that's why, in some ways, it felt important for me to get involved and to support on both sides. And sometimes it felt like holding both sides together, and other times it felt like holding both sides apart. it felt important to engage, having been a member in some ways of both in different ways.
Well, I'll just say I have never met a human being quite like Mr. McGee. And so to say, what were your concerns, Derek, as Jimmy was coming into this world and we were entering into his, as you're saying, I don't think it's going to work. I actually have never heard you say it that clearly. How come?
Well, I didn't want to say out loud what my fears were going on inside. Again, if we go back, I can recall Jimmy saying to me, because my wife, Brenda, does a lot of work on racial reconciliation. And Jimmy said to me, I don't believe in reconciliation. I don't believe in racial reconciliation. And I said, I know. Let's not even get into that conversation. Because in some ways, Jimmy is right. There have been different attempts at linking Christians, particularly evangelicals, together with different ethnic Christians, right? Ethnic evangelicals. Some have been successful and some have failed. The latest one was a racial reconciliation movement. It was an attempt, and there's moments when I know my wife felt like, hey, have I worked in vain? Because we're back here again. And we've tried the be kind to each other posture. And I know Jimmy's posture wasn't necessarily be kind to each other posture. It was we need to shock you into the real truth of what's going on. And I think at the time, I felt like the Allender Center was still in a be kind to each other sort of posture. And I thought, well, he's going to come and get angry with y'all at some point, and it's going to fall apart. He's going to say, enough of this. I've done this before. I don't want to do this anymore. I've been disappointed this way before. But it was quite exhilarating for me and unique in a way, because I kind of blame Jimmy for this relationship, quite frankly. And he can blame Andy. But if he had not begun to feel like I can see the possibility of us merging and doing work together. And I think it came out of a heart for my mutual concern I share with him, the African-American community, that we need work that allows us to recognize we've been in a traumatic situation and that trauma has impacted us over generations. And I don't think at the time, I think with the tendency of white evangelicals is to think that it's a single generation, interpersonal, if not individual problem. That if I'm kind to you and treat you nicely and care for you and love you, that erases generational pain. And I don't think that was going to work. We've done that or tried to do that, and that's not been successful. So his transition allowed me to think, okay, this is a possible relationship that has longevity and could model what I think has to happen. I think we have to partner with people, not just help people. We've got to find, and that means, and I think I remember saying in Colorado, that means we're going to fight, we're going to struggle with each other. The commitment is not to let go. Do not let go in the wrestle.
Well, I'm thinking back to the conversation we had on the podcast last week with Linda Royster and Wendell Moss. And I think there was a deep sense of everything you're naming actually was playing out in our midst. And there was this sense of waking up to the reality that our love was not enough. And in fact, we were harming people we knew we loved in our midst. And I think I will just speak for myself. The generosity of Jimmy to come in and say, you all need some help. There are some things you need to submit to. There's some processes of transformation that are going to be both educational and deeply interpersonal, like amongst yourselves, that I would say are still ongoing. There's no arrival point. And I'm grateful for you reemphasizing that, Derek, that reality that that kind of focus on individual goodness, that, I love you. So therefore, my intentions are good, even if the impact is severe. And I think, you and I, we wrestle well. So I'm always grateful for your reminder that true relationships will involve conflict, will involve a sense of needing to learn new ways of relating to each other and what that looks like in a partnership that is made up of people. and relationships that are developing, and the mutuality of that, as opposed to like a patronizing kind of movement to act without actually being transformed.
And transformation is a wrestling. It is a shifting. I mean, this is Jacob becoming Israel, and the sort of wrestling with God, and the wounding in that, and the stress of that. And I think any sort of relationship that is going to be transforming will have those pieces in it. It will have that sort of wrestling and tussle and struggle. And I'm appreciative that you all had the courage to engage it.
Well, and we're deeply grateful that you were also functioning in some ways as an interpreter of us with Jimmy, and indeed interpreting this remarkable being to us. And so, Jimmy, as you think about what that process has brought us, what you've seen and what it's brought you, what has this early beginning? 4 years is not a long period of time, but to say, so what's your benefit? What's the benefit you've seen to us and the benefit we've been to you?
Yeah, it's not always the years, it's the miles that can age a car, right? And so you can have a 2-year-old car go 100,000 miles. It's an old car. Yeah. But what, there's a name we need to probably interject. And she's not formally been a part of the conversations, but she has been here. And that's Joy DeGruy. She wrote a book called The Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome and was popularized. Many people see her on YouTube. And so the acknowledgement that Black people were coming out and still have PTSD was a reality that, quite frankly, I think it was questionable. She was very much ahead of her time. And this idea of accumulated trauma and trauma that's passed on, I think it was conceptually a while for us to wrap this around our brain. And what I recognized in you guys was skill to deal with trauma, a skill that I did not possess. And quite frankly, I wanted to be informed, but I didn't see, okay, wow, they got a skill. I want to take on this skill and then discard them because I can feel like I can do the skill myself. That's not what I wanted in a partnership. I don't want to be what my partners are. I want my partnership relationally to give me what I don't have. And then not only give it to me, but give it organizationally. Because as I was looking through and I love the way that Derek talked about it, it's a collective trauma. So all the things that you guys were doing already in terms of sexual, physical, emotional, we already got that. And I don't have skills with that. And I said, this is a great space to utilize that. But then if we add this fourth component and make it whole, you can begin on touching areas that, quite frankly, our Black students are confused and hurt by. And that's what my hope was. I mean, even now, as we're dealing with the pandemic and all of the deaths that we're ranging with, a variety of my students have been discipled to say that anger is bad. And so they're feeling shame because they're angry over Ahmaud. They're angry over George Floyd's death. They're angry over Breonna. And yet their Christian experience, the way they've been discipled, has told them that, one, the Christian experience does not affirm anger. Christian people don't like angry Black people. So therefore, they're not permitted to be totally Christian and be angry simultaneously because they feel like it's a conflict. I felt like you guys offered that to us to actually detox them, decolonize them, and actually unlearn bad behavior that would allow them to survive living. Because as sad as I have to say it with Breonna and George and Ahmaud, they're not the last ones that are going to die. And so, again, it's not just every time one of them die, we see 100 funerals all up, pile up, and it's almost like we're going to 100 funerals all over again. And that's what my hope was, that you guys would give us a way to mitigate and help students as young adults become adults who are whole people, not ignoring, repressing trauma, but knowing that the trauma is a part of their humanity and give a stronger, I think, a more honest review of what it means to really know Jesus in this world as Black people, because they had not reconciled Jesus being in their Black bodies.
Mm-hmm. Well, from my standpoint, the partnership has been deeply mutual, but not equal, because I had so much more to engage with regard to the blindness of the log in my own eye. And it wasn't just a mutual, you have information, you pass it, we pass information over. But you had to, in one sense, step into a category of formation for us, not merely process or information, but formation. So I'm wondering, how does it go?
I think the idea is, can I be fully human in front of you? And can we also see each other's strengths and weaknesses simultaneously? The one thing I've never said, nor I expected, and I've said this to Derek, I've never expected you guys to be perfect. My idea of a partner is that you're going to walk down this road and there's some things on the particular issue that I feel like is our strength. I want to be of service to you. My desire then is for you as a partner to say, hey, can you help me? So I won't force myself upon you and said, there's a hole in front of you. I think I can help you go around that hole or survive the hole. Even if I see the hole, if my partner doesn't want my assistance, then I'll back up and I'll let you fall in the hole. But I'm going to grieve with you while you're in the hole, and I'm going to be there when you get out to be with you. But at the same time, my greatest desire was to say, hey, you know what? We really don't know what the heck we're doing. Can you help us? If we went in the hole, can you help us out? And so that's what I think partnership is. And I think the same for us. I mean, it's the idea, there's certain things that I know I'm going to get down to this dark place with students and staff. And I can really think, because I read 2 or 3 books, that I know something. The truth of the matter is I'm not skilled to get them out of this. And there's times that we've hit holes. And I said, I can't get us out of this. And I looked to Derek. I looked at Wendell. I've looked to Rachael and say, listen, this is a hole I can't get us out in. I think I can throw down a rope, but it won't extend as far if you don't help me get that. And so I think that's what real partnership is knowing your limitation. And then it's the desire to know, hey, wait a minute, we were never built to be a one-size shop. We were built to be people to collaborate. And so therefore help me, because I can't do it on my own.
And can I just say that to me is the blessing that Jimmy has been. His willingness to say, well, he could have been defended and say, I don't want your help because when you help me, you hurt me. But he said, no, I need help. And that to me is what opened up the possibility of relationship much deeper. And then I think the mutual engagement is saying, well, we need help too. Well, and we could see each other. I think there's a lot in this sort of current evangelical movement that's frightened of disunity. I mean, in some ways, don't talk about race because that breaks us up. Don't talk about this, that messes us up. Don't talk about this, don't engage that. And so the fear of disunity means we don't get into some deeper conversations. The partnership allows us to get into those conversations and even through some of those conversations because we've committed to each other beyond just the topic we're talking about. And so we committed to something that was more significant, and that was, how do we heal trauma? Not just simply in terms of white middle class, upper middle class communities, but how do we heal trauma in communities that have not had as much opportunity to talk about their pain? Well, because we united around that, then it becomes, hey, we're going to be in this to talk through the tough places when I'm not sure if I trust you, or I'm not sure if I trust you even understand how I feel about that. So the partnerships is, to me, a response to the fear of disunity. We're talking about people who don't have relationships and partnerships. So, of course, any conversation that's disruptive will push us back into our tribes. And that's my concern about the current state that we're looking at. I don't know if people have the relationships that allow them to avoid becoming more tribal versus more engaged and collaborative.
And if I look at the relationship too, Derek, I would say this is another case of Plessy versus Ferguson needs to go away. We're separate and we're not equal. The one thing I know in our community, brown, red, yellow, we got full of trauma, but we don't have access to people to help us out of it. And trauma has been so familiar with us. It's almost like Hannah Hernard's book, High Feet on High Places. It's been a companion. Sorrow and suffering has been our companion on our journey. And so we don't ignore it. We're not mad they're around. We're so familiar with them. We never really think there's a way to process this and it could be transformative. And that's the hope I had, again, in this relationship. But here's the deal, though. It wasn't just to help brown, red, and yellow people and black people. The fact of the matter is white people were more traumatized or just as much as we were. They just didn't know it. And so they were, playing smoke and mirrors. They were doing a used car game with us, selling us a vehicle that they knew didn't run. And they knew it had no gas in it either once we filled up the tank. And so it was an idea to let them know that, hey, I want you to know we're in a boatload of crap right here, but I want you to know that stench ain't just on our side. Y'all smell just as bad, if not worse than we do. And we need partnership here if we're going to get clean.
Well, one of the questions you asked me at that meal was, have you ever begun to address your own racial identity? And I don't know if you remember that moment, but I sort of looked at you and went, I don't even know what you're asking. So the assumption of white privilege is I don't have to think about my identity. And, and I said, well, I have a Jewish father. And one of the questions you brought was, and how much of your own ethnic heritage plays itself out in how you think and how you teach, how you engage. Again, questions that, without a partnership, there cannot be a level of trust to engage those. And yet the question itself creates a long, ongoing engagement with those questions, not only for myself, but now to be able to see I'm a good therapist, but that category has not been in my work actually with my white clients. So how did that happen that I'm able to get umpteen years of graduate education and that category is not in my mind at all? So that's part of the work that, again, iron sharpening iron has the potential to create a greater sharpness.
And Dan, I just want to throw in, as you mentioned, your client, you've had clients who have defensive structures that have worked for them, either because they've chosen to look at their financial or their other sort of status pieces, and they've used those things to defend against where they've had traumatic response or traumatic injury. I think if we kind of overlay that on a larger dominant culture to say, well, it's been successful. You haven't had to look at it because your defenses have held. It doesn't mean there's not deficits or wounds or hurt or disconnect. Even the sense of having to be lording over groups of people is a bit of a distancing. But you haven't had to deal with the sort of wounds because it's worked, if you will. That's the challenge, because we're asking people to really shift their identity. And this is important for me, is I think it's not just simply changing your attitude about what it means to be of a cultural group. We're asking people a deep work of saying, who are you? So the question to you, Dan, was, who are you? And then how does who you are, the things you've ignored and thought weren't important because other things were working, how does that impact your relationships with other people? And how does it impact you in terms of your relationships with yourself? So there's some challenging pieces in here in this work. I don't want to make the work sound a change of attitude. It is much more a change and shifting of identity.
Yes, absolutely. And given we have just a few minutes left, Jimmy, I'd love for you to operate at least with prophetic dreaming. Where do you see this partnership going?
Well, there's a couple of things I said when I came here, and I think this what got Derek. I want to say one thing Derek said to us on one of the beautiful scenarios in Colorado. He told us, let's not start envisioning. Let's start building relationships. He said, let's start investing in this because things are going to go wrong. I mean, it wasn't an if, we just know it is. But if we can build enough relational capital that when things go wrong, we won't abandon ourselves, then we know we got a solid relationship and a solid partnership. And I think about it often, and I actually, all of you guys are in my head. I've never started talking about things in my body until I started talking about you guys. Unless it was something I didn't eat that well, and then Derek started telling me, no, man, I'm not going to do your work for you. You got to do your work. And I've adopted that now as something for myself and for other people. And then the beauty of even Rachael and I want to say the Allender Center is Becky and Kathy and Wendell and Jen and Susan and Abby and Trapper. It's a family that we adopted. It wasn't just 2 or 3 people. That's a big part of it. I think what my hope was in the very beginning, and when I invited you guys even to our national conference, to say 2 things. I want you to have access to our space. I want you to see the potential of work that can happen with people of color. But then most of all, my hope, and this is what I think scared Derek, I was envisioning my staff going through your certificate program. I was envisioning some of our students or staff going through your graduate program so that it's not just tapping into the Allender Center, but that we can increase your team and deepen it. And we can get some soldiers over here to work in spaces of the population that you guys are not in. I wanted you to keep your current constituency, but I thought we could expand it. And Derek, we're there now, right? I mean, I just got a text today from one of our Impact staff who said I was accepted into the graduate program in the Seattle school. And, one of my colleagues has gone through all the certificate program. And now I got other friends I'm recruiting who are people of color that say, I want you to try this out because we need work in our communities. And I think this could be a good partnership. It ain't going to be perfect and it's not going to be without pain. But you know what? If there's no pain, then it's really not that much gain. I think my personal trainer told me there's no change without a challenge. And I believe that to be true for us. And so that's my envisioning. We need to create an army of people to engage this because right now, the evangelical world is pretty anemic. I don't have much confidence at all that they're going to recover and engage what's happening in our country. They already have proven so by their silence. And so that means they're awkward and they're scared. And this is a familiar place that they don't know what to do. So they're going to wait till it subsides so they can get back as business as usual. If we get back to business as usual, that means they make my job harder because Black students don't want to be attracted to that kind of Christian community.
Mm-hmm. Gentlemen, thank you. Thank you, Rachael. Thank you. And the goodness of what we have been privileged to be part of. As I look at the latter part of my life, this is one of the gifts that feels like, again, confirmation of the presence and the kindness of God. So as justice and mercy are meant to kiss, this is a relationship that I think is going to continue to grow us.
So if you have found yourself wondering, who is the Impact Movement? You can read more. You can find them online. Also want to let you know that Derek, myself, Dan, and our friend Jen will be joining Jimmy and some of his team on Monday night on a Facebook Live to talk more about trauma and lament, fragility, whiteness, and healing and hope. And so we hope you'll join us there and support the work that we're doing. I would say this is a partnership that involves relationship, involves learning, involves training and transformation, and does involve a lot of dreaming about what is possible and what can be possible. The mission of the Impact Movement is to impact spiritual leaders who impact the world. They engage college students and marketplace professionals. They exist to serve and work in cooperation with and in support of the African American Church with programs that include college chapters, summer mission trips, and a national network of those engaged in youth and young adult ministry. If you want to find out more about the Impact Movement, you can find them at impactmovement.org. The Allender
Allender Center podcast is produced by the Seattle School of Theology and Psychology.
If you'd like more information about the Allender Center, you can look at theallendercenter.org.